important non-negotiable principle was the idea that workers knew precisely they were the experts of the very solutions the union needed to develop.
Als je samen bent, kun je wel je problemen
When you are
bespreekbaar
together,
maken.
you can make your problems discussable and make them
Je
visible.
kan het wel zichtbaar maken.
From invisible to unstoppable. This is episode 5, the final episode of Unsung Cleaners, a podcast where Europe's cleaners tell their stories in their own words. Throughout this series, we've stepped into the unknown world of the people who keep Europe running, often before anyone arrives and after everyone leaves. We've heard about the craft of cleaning, the pace, the training, the protocols, and the cost of doing it in the margins. Nights that mess with sleep cycles, schedules that don't add up to a stable life, and workplaces where cleaners with migrant backgrounds, especially women, are welcomed for their labor but left on a ledge when it comes to rights and recognition. We've kept coming back to the same question. How can work that's so essential still be treated as dispensable? But this series is as much about solutions as challenges. Because when there is solidarity, there is always hope. Across Europe, cleaners are no longer waiting for permission to be seen. They are organizing, mobilizing, and building grassroots power to push for legal changes to set better standards, together. In this final episode, we follow that shift and move from the invisibility behind narrow corridors to collective power on the streets, from being overlooked to setting the agenda for fair work. We meet the cleaners and organizers, turning isolation into solidarity and silence into a demand for justice that can no longer be ignored. One of the most impressive examples comes from the Netherlands, where this movement has a name: the Cleaners Parliament, a network of elected cleaner representatives who come together across work sites to set priorities, take decisions, and lead campaigns based on their lived experiences. This parliament didn't emerge from boardrooms or policy papers, it was built by cleaners themselves. And in this episode, I'm joined by two of the organizers who helped create it. Khadija Hiati, who started as a cleaner and went on to serve as president of the Cleaners Parliament from 2011 to 2024. And Heri Hogenboom, a veteran union organizer who helped shape the campaign from the very start. We'll also hear from Valerie Alzaga, the organizer who helped bring the legendary worker-led Justice for Janitors model from the United States to Europe. And from Zena Bichiji, whom we met in the last episode, reflecting on what happens when the invisibles organize and step into the spotlight. Here's what happens when politicians, decision makers, and employers fail workers, and workers rebuild their own power instead. Khadija and Harry, thank you so much for joining me. Khadija, let's start at the beginning. How did you become a cleaner?
Ja, ik weet nog, in 2003 ben ik begonnen met
In
schoonmaken.
2003, I started working in cleaning because I could combine it well with children and part-time work. But on the very first day, I already saw how the supervisor treated people. No appreciation for the work, no respect. And that really triggered me to think cleaning is very important work. And the fact that you didn't get respect for it was a shock to me.
Was voor mij wel een schok.
Harry, what drew you, a former shop steward at Heineken, to organizing in cleaning?
Immediately when I started working for the cleaning sector, there was so much love and so many people who really needed to be organized. It got me enthusiastic very quickly. And I saw the real issues and problems of people, no respect, intimidation, people really being harassed by their employers and the supervisors. And there was also this material need. People were really struggling to feed their families. And I was really ablaze. Like, I thought I didn't know this kind of oppression and exploitation was still part of our world. And it really radicalized my views on politics and on unionism.
I think you've both described seeing deeply unfair things in cleaning work, not just low pay, but also a lack of respect. Khadija, is that what pushed you to start organizing? What made you decide to join the union?
Maar heel eerlijk, mijn eerste inspiratie was pas in 2008.
My first inspiration was only in 2008 and 2009 when the Schiphol people stood up. And in 2009, I actually joined our activists within cleaning. And that did something for me, but also for colleagues in the hospitals who almost didn't dare to come forward with problems. When you are together, you can make your problems discussable and make them visible. And that really triggered me then to fight. And I'm still fighting.
Strijden en ik ben nog steeds een strijder.
You've both been part of this movement for so many years now. Has anything fundamentally changed? Do you think there's been a shift in the way that cleaning work is now perceived?
Wat heel belangrijk is en wat echt veranderd is, en dat zie ik de zichtbaarheid.
What has really changed is the visibility. Before our campaign, before our actions, cleaners were literally invisible. I worked in an hospital myself, and they wouldn't even say good morning, good afternoon to the staff or the cleaners. No one saw them. But from experience, on the days that we went on strike, the next day, when we came back, the nurses came up to me and they said, "You were right, keep going. You were missed." So, as we often say in Dutch, sometimes you have to be loud, people have to feel it before they acknowledge that people are visible, that people are important and needed.
Om respect en waardering en zichtbaarheid. Dus dat is 100% veranderd.
To add to what Khadija said, I really think we made a huge difference for the whole sector. So even the employers, they have to recognize now that our strikes help them to put cleaning on the map and not only think that clients want for as the least money possible, but also see the necessity of this and that cleaners are important for whole society.
Out of those strikes and campaigns came something pretty permanent, the Cleaners' Parliament. Harry, why did you decide to call it Parliament?
We found out that the union slang didn't really catch on with a lot of cleaners. So we wanted to use a word that gave the importance to everybody. And that's why we called it a parliament. And that's why we got the parliament together and voted a government, because those terms in Dutch were more known by everybody. And it gave people a real boost. Like, wow, I chose a member of the Parliament of Cleaners. And I'm speaking out for my group of colleagues. And it really stuck, this word. And we've been using it ever since. It really gives people position and the idea that they're not there to speak out their own minds about things, but they're actually representing and the voice of all the cleaners and all the union members.
Khadija, what was the motivation or the moment that made you want to become leader of this movement?
Ik denk het eerste, vooral de schoonmakers zijn.
Among cleaners, there are different cultures, different religions, different backgrounds, but all of us together had one goal. Back then, the goal really was, I'm a cleaner, my work has value, and I'm visible. And apart from that, nothing separates us. We as people, actually the whole society, what you want for yourself and for others is a dignified life, a dignified income, and to be treated with respect as a human being. That comes first. And that triggered me then to say, I want to take up the fight. We are all one. We are all just human. We have a sector that is very important, yet undervalued. And that was my goal. My goal was to take up the street together, regardless of who you are.
Alle de weg opgaan, ongeacht wie je bent.
And looking back at all of these years of organizing, would you say that there is one campaign that really stands out for you?
Ja, als je het over campagnes hebben, natuurlijk de campagne schoonmaak.
The Cleaners campaign changed everything. especially going outward with visibility. Because within our union, we were just doing endless negotiating. People no longer went out to the street. And this is still a big example for other sectors too, to say if it can be done there, then we can do it too. So, visibility is really the most important thing in an action that you do, regardless of the sector or background.
De sector op achtergrond.
I'm really proud from the start. We really gave the stage to the cleaners. Before it was boring union officers who talked about process and difficult language. And we said, no, we only want our leaders to be in the newspapers, on the television, and make sure there are no others standing in their sunlight. So we really thought about ways to do things in a new way. So we brought music to the strikes and to the actions. We start singing songs. We try to make colorful expressions of cleaners themselves. So picket signs with written texts on it by cleaners themselves. And we really focused on how to tell the narrative of cleaners and make sure that we did things that really people shocked sometimes. We did sit-ins and we went inside lobbies, really took over the places where we had our direct actions.
Throughout the series, we've spoken about how many cleaners are women, often from migration backgrounds. Khadija, so this is really a pertinent question for you as a Muslim woman from a migration background yourself. How has that shaped your fight?
Nee, ik heb hem echt verstaan. Ik weet wel, het is eigenlijk van...
It's two-sided. I find it a responsibility precisely because, as a Muslim woman or someone who looks a bit different, I have the responsibility to really stand up for everyone, but also to show you can do it. I was always quite proud when people say, Khadija, you are our trailblazer and we're proud of you and you are really an example for many women, especially women with a migration background, who then dare to take out to the street, but let their voice be heard also. And at the same time, I still always have to keep working on myself. I have to keep up. I have to know what's going on now. But I'm a person who keeps going despite many obstacles.
Ondanks heel veel obstakels.
You've both also spoken about responsibility, standing up not just for yourself, but also for others who are more exploited or more exposed to it. Harry, the demonstration that you organized, I think specifically with undocumented migrant workers in 2025, sounds like a really powerful example of this. Why do you think it was important for the union to stand with people who are often excluded, even from legal protection and unionizing?
Domestic workers, their communities, especially Filipinos, Indonesians, and South Americans, they got together and in 2006 or 7, and they approached the union themselves like, we've got undocumented people from our communities and we want them to be unionized. So they actually, as communities, started the union of themselves, of migrant domestic workers. A lot of people inside the union had really second thoughts about it. And then our first negotiator and my supervisor at the time, Mari Martins, he said, that's all bullshit. We are a union. We are an organization of workers who want to stand up and fight for their rights. We don't care if people are underdocumented or undocumented or whatever. If people are working, they should be able to fight and stand up to get what every worker deserves in this country. Now, it's very, very brave for cleaners to stand up against oppression and discrimination, etc. But if you're an undocumented worker in Dutch society, that's another level altogether. Because those get harassed by police and they have a really difficult time. So we've been organizing domestic workers to get permit stays and to be allowed to work here and get respect for their work. In the meantime, at the moment, there is a lot of anti-migrant pressure, political, but also sometimes on the streets, with extreme right bringing violence to demonstrations, etc. And when the government took on a law to criminalize undocumented workers and the people who help them in all different ways. We decided to stand up against it, and we had the biggest demonstration ever of undocumented workers last 7th September. There were around 800 undocumented workers, and we were with 4,000 people, all from the union, but also from all different organizations who support undocumented workers. And we really had a big fest and a very enjoyable, very strong demonstration. But after this demonstration, I need to tell you, because of elections taking place, there was a lot of extreme right profilation on the streets, and the government, local governments, have been enacting in a very harmful way towards undocumented workers. And also, clients of undocumented workers really got scared and told their workers not to participate in these kinds of events.
Listening to all of this, the strikes, the organizing, the people who are taking these risks, it's clear that change doesn't happen by itself. So, if you could speak directly to employers and policymakers, Khadija and Harry, the people who are shaping these systems, what would you want them to understand?
Het belangrijkste is als ik een werkgever zou
The
spreken,
most important thing is that people often get the feeling that they are dependent on an employer. But it's the other way around. Employers are dependent on them. Because if the work is not done by those people on the shop floor, he doesn't have a little chair on that little tower. You must admit that you're dependent on those people, and therefore you must treat them well. That is my message to all employers.
Dat is mijn boodschap aan alle werkgevers.
I'd like to add, I like employers and politicians especially, but also union officials, etc. They have to stop thinking they can do it for the people. They have to give the stage to the people themselves. The people have to have discussions about the world they want to live in. We should make that visible. Stop thinking we can do it for the people. And the other thing, we really need an international fight, get the white collar workers, but also the white workers who are distancing themselves and are easily trapped in right-wing bullshit stories.
I feel like there are still plenty of challenges ahead. But after everything you've built successfully, what keeps you going and what gives you hope?
Mij geeft hoop dat wij echt. Dat ik het gevoel
What
heb
gives
dat
me
we
hope
samen
is that we keep involving people, stay together, and hold on
steunen.
into each other. And then we can get there. Someday we will get there.
En dan kunnen we er zijn. Ergens ooit gaan we er zijn.
That spirit of solidarity and the idea that workers themselves should lead and make decisions about their well being connects to a much wider and historic organizing tradition. In Europe, that tradition drew direct inspiration from a campaign that changed the rules of the game, namely the Justice for Janitors campaign in the United States. Valerie Alsaga is a labor organizer and migrant rights activist who has worked for 9 years on justice for janitors in the US. She later helped adapt its organizing model across Europe, from Germany to Denmark, the Netherlands, and the UK, bringing its core principles across the Atlantic. At the heart of the campaign were some core principles, ideas that shaped how cleaners organized, that would then later feed the fire of worker organizing elsewhere, like in Europe.
The most important non-negotiable principle that the Justice for Janitors campaign brought to Europe was the idea that workers had to be at the center of the decisions, of the organizing, of the ally building, of the campaigning, and that workers knew precisely they were the experts of the very solutions the union needed to develop. It was workers, migrant workers, who had left their lives, sacrificed so much, had already this strength within them that would be the motor of change. Another non-negotiable principle really was the idea that we needed to understand our opposition better than they knew themselves, map ourselves, our allies, our potential allies, and that we also needed to understand that moving the opposition had to do with what mattered to them and not so much what mattered to us as a union or as workers, and that we needed to really kind of follow the money and understand how to interject the goals of these huge corporations and outsource companies in a much more effective way. We always needed to try first the nice way. And if that inevitably did not work, then we were always justified to escalate and to become a much more militant union, but not out of a lack of trying the nice way, but out of really having tried the nice way and not finding our opposition willing to be fair. Then that is the way to go from very defensive bargaining position to a much more determined and offensive bargaining position.
What do we want? Justice for leaders. When do we want it? Now. What do we want?
Well, we're here today, the RMC Union, the Union for
I
London.
think the beauty of having had practitioners develop the methodology of Justice for Janitors in real life meant that already in the US, you had to adapt from city to city, from state to state. I think what was definitely difficult to transfer and difficult to challenge in Europe was the idea that the unions were not organizing unions. I think the challenge was really to talk about power and to talk about how unions needed to change. I mean, I think a lot of the unions were not proactive, were not organizing, and we were coming to say, we are the future, we are your future. And if you don't fight and if you don't learn to fight, you will lose more and more. It was brave leaders that opened the space, demanded investment, demanded time and focus to do things differently, to become organizing unions, to become organizing sectors, to put the relationships with industry on hold and challenge those relationships, to imagine and demand more. And I want to say that that's part of why the transfer was successful. It was we did it with fellow unions, we did it with social movements, with churches, with migrant rights organizations, with women's rights organizations, with all sorts of organizations. And we were able to put broad public pressure, but also win a huge amount of public support. We needed to hit the opposition where it hurt, but we also did it with a huge amount of creativity. And in the Netherlands in particular, I think that's where the combination of the creativity of the US, the creativity of migrants like me who were coming from Mexico and Latin America, coming from very rich histories of resistance and campaigning, and then obviously the creativity of Europeans like the Dutch really created some of the most fantastic, colorful, creative campaigns I've ever been a part of and ever seen. And that the workers, coming from many parts of the world, from Suriname music to Moroccan community building practices to Turkish food and ways of collectivizing, we all put our practices together. And I think that is what is important about this European experience, is that we were also kind of merging all best practices from different parts of the world, but also using the European rights and the European own creative history and creative approaches. Organizing showed us the hope that we are able to control our futures if we decide to fight back, if we decide to organize, if we decide to unionize, and if we decide to align with many other movements, we can actually change the world. And not only our world, but obviously the worlds that depend on our labor.
That lesson, that the most invisible can become the most powerful, resonates in other campaigns led by cleaners across Europe. In Germany, union leader Zeynep Bichiji, who we heard from in the previous episode, has also experienced this firsthand. In strikes, in workplaces, and in everyday acts of organizing.
Ich habe erlebt, was passiert, wenn Kolleginnen
We had a big strike in Germany's cleaning sector. We called it the uprising of the invisibles. Women dared to stand up, make themselves visible, and say, "We're stopping work. We deserve proper pay and respect." At one small school with 6 women, I saw how they blossomed, became stronger, stood together in solidarity.
Natürlich auch anständig bezahlt werden. Das muss anerkannt werden.
Cleaners can organize themselves. One colleague started a simple WhatsApp group at her workplace, and that became an election team for the Works Council vote. Coming together, every idea, every action helps the larger movement. Change only happens together.
Diese Bewegung dieser ganz vielen Menschen, ein Teil davon zu sein.
Khadija's unbridled leadership and Harry's belief in preparing the stage for cleaners. The inspirational cross-border legacy of campaigns like Justice for Janitors. The stubborn hope of the continuous, mounting uprising of the invisibles, over and over again. A blossoming collective identity and belonging of joining the fight for a better life that is worth fighting for. Across this series, we followed one thread. The story of cleaners moving from the background to the foreground, from the shadows of the night shift to the spotlight of collective action, from silent corridors to powerful street marches, from isolation to worker power. Hayat, Harry, Khadija, Kwasi, Lisa, Naomi, Natalia, Nina, Stephanie, and Zeynep, all the cleaners we spoke to on this podcast, and the thousands of cleaners they organize alongside. Together, they've shown us that the demand for dignity, for fair pay, and for well-being is not a nice to have. It's a basic, urgent necessity. And they're claiming it. And while cleaners have been calling out injustices, they've also shown us the way forward. Loudly, proudly, and clearly. From the streets of Amsterdam to the halls of the European Parliament. With radical care, with community, and with strategic organizing. Because when official channels fail, workers will always lead the way. When dignity is denied, they build power anyway. We hope that the strength, the pride, and the honesty of the cleaners that we spoke with on this podcast has moved you and will stay with you. We hope that it's made you look differently at the people who hold our world together and at the systems that still choose deliberately to erase them, because their stories and struggles don't end here. If you found this podcast meaningful, please share it with your networks. The next time you hear about cleaners organizing, through a union, a protest, or a campaign, don't just observe from the sidelines. Stand with them, amplify them, and follow their lead. Because justice doesn't trickle down from the powerful. It rises from those who refuse to be ignored. Thank you so much for listening to Unsung Cleaners, a podcast supported by UNI Europa and co-funded by the European Commission. Check out UNI Europa's research and work at www.uni-europa.org to become part of the movement for better work and better conditions for workers across the world. This podcast was produced by Sedan Andler for UNI Europa. Interviews and narration by Gail Rego. Special thanks to Alessia Mora and Mark Bergfeld, and to Sedan Andler and Alessia Mora for interpretation and dubbing. And to all our guests, thank you so much. Eva Edstrom, Giusy Sferuzza, Hayat El Hor, Harry Hogenbohm, Jos Engelar, Karin Yarling, Karin Zadadvar, Khadija Hiati, Kwasi Agyaman Prempe, Lisa Stenson, Naomi Asen, Natalia Higueras Lopez, Nina Autio, Paula Bassetti, Stephanie Wodarski, Valerie Alzaga, Veronique Achille Revio, and Zena Bichiji.